So this time we'll have this session recorded for those who will be tuning in at 10 tomorrow. All right, and today we'll do an aviation class, and we'll be talking about departure procedures, and we're really going to get into part two of this. So I'm going to do a brief recap of what we discussed yesterday, which really had a lot to do with the standard instrument departure procedures. So it's a moment here. I'm going to go ahead and share my iPad, and a lot of us right now are using ForeFlight for our discussion. So if you have that, I recommend referencing that, or whatever publication or digital flight pack that you're using, so you can kind of follow along. All right, let's go ahead and pull up the iPad. And that should be popping up in just a moment. There we are. Everybody seeing the ForeFlight?
Good.
Okay, I'm just going to mute myself here for just a minute so I don't cough in your guys' ears. Okay, I'm back with you. All right, Rksg is our airfield. I'm just going to pull up, actually, we're going to go up to Songtan because there wasn't really any standard instrument departures for Rksg. And some of the stuff we talked about yesterday in regards to ForeFlight is, do you remember where we can find the departure procedures in ForeFlight? Anybody?
In the procedure section.
100%. And you see that up on the, right now I've got ForeFlight displayed. Do you see that off to the right section where there's multiple tabs, one that says info, weather, runway, procedures, and NOTAMs?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to click on the procedures tab, and then where should we find that? There's going to be some sub tabs in there.
Departure.
100%. Okay, so under departure procedures, do we have any SIDs here?
Dragon departure?
100%. There's four of them, isn't there? Well, really, technically, there's three. Because one of them, don't ask me why it's in there, but that K55, I bet you that's an arrival procedure. The K55 AAR dip. Let's take a look at it, but I think that's what that is. I think that's an arrival procedure just kind of coded in there. All right, so I think what we have here is really three. We have Dragon, Goji, and Mustang. And let's pull up Dragon. Okay, oh, look at that. It saved my notes from yesterday. Okay, does anyone want to brief us a little bit on this departure procedure, on this SID? You don't have to be perfect, but just cover what would you think if you were sitting down here doing table talk with an aviator or with your CPG or an opposite crew member, what type of things would you brief you at the table regarding this? If I can have one person kind of volunteer and give a mini briefing on it. All right.
Sure. All right, so this is the Dragon 9 departure. You have your freaks on the top left there. And then I guess it depends where you're taking off from.
Let's just say for this
Pretty
we're going to be taking off runway 09 left.
Okay, so it has it down right there. You're climbing onto the SOT Vortex 5 DME, which the two ways is a DME and then GPS. And then you're turning left to intercept the radio coming off of R076, the Dragon. So 076 is the radio. So you're gonna make like a left turn, and we have it there 46 degrees, which is about a 30-degree left turn. And once you intercept the R76 radio, you're turning right, or probably like 10 degrees prior, and then you're turning right. And you have to ensure that you cross Dragon at 7,000, no more nor less, and then you can continue as follows.
Okay, I like that briefing.
Going down.
Yeah, I really like that briefing. It was clean, concise, and you talked about the most important things that needed to be discussed, the things that were going to be important for our flight, which was the navigational information, right? Because we already looked at the tabular data that was up at the top as far as the rate of climb, and we had already assessed if we're in a helicopter and we're doing an ITO takeoff, we don't really need to worry about that climb gradient, right? So that's really not applicable to us unless you have an engine failure that may be a bit of a problem. All right, so you really hit the hot spots and you really talked about, go ahead.
No, I just said Roger.
Oh, okay, all right, my bad, I just want to chime in there. Okay, absolutely, so that was the primary thing. And then what maybe one other thing there, circling orange, that might be good idea to discuss? On the lower left-hand corner.
Radar required.
that there's radar required for this procedure, 100%. So that's a good idea to discuss. Now, if you were to pull up your NOTAMs and you were to note on there that there was a radar outage, then we already know that this one's out of the question. We're not going to be able to do it. Okay. And we didn't really get into the discussion yesterday about what the other, I mean, we kind of named what the other departure procedure, we didn't dig into it too much because just because the radar is out of service doesn't mean you're out of luck as far as taking off out of that airfield. It just means we're not going to do this Dragon 9 departure. Not fair enough? Oh, sorry, I didn't share my screen with you. Let me turn these overhead lights off because they tend to make the video kind of blur a little bit. Okay, that should be better. Okay, I actually got dressed today. There you go. No pajamas. All right, so that's pretty much it. Now, what I recommend now, if you have ForeFlight, or I don't know what's the other app that's out there. I think there's an Army app, and it's Flight GoPro.
Arrow app.
Arrow app. Okay.
Arrow.
Arrow app. Does it allow you to write on your approach plates like you can in ForeFlight?
You have like a note section,
I
I
haven't
think.
used it.
Okay, no section works. I mean, as long as you have a place where you can annotate this information on. Now, in my case, because ForeFlight permits it, I just stylus write that stuff on there because that's what I'm going to be referencing when I take off. I'm going to be looking at this this SID plate here. And you can even put it on your notepad if you want it. Like you can go to the notes section in ForeFlight, or if you're using the Arrow app and you have a notes section, just put those notes in there so you know that, hey, immediately after I take off, we're going to make a left turn, 046 heading, then a right turn to intercept the 076, climb and maintain mandatory up to the 7,000 feet until crossing Dragon. And at that point, we can expect it's going to be diverse because that's what it's saying there. Then as filed, so it'll be as per whatever you put on your 1801. Okay, but it's a really good idea to pre-plan these things. Don't wait till you get into the aircraft to figure this out because then you're going to be behind the power curve. All right. And then we also talked about if you don't get the SID that you were planning on, so if you jump in and they don't give you this Dragon 9 departure, they give you something else, it's okay if you're not familiar with it to let ATC know you need a few moments to familiarize yourself and the crew with the departure. You also have the option, you have one more option too. Okay, you have one more option about that. If they give you this SID, right, and you don't want it, what's another thing you could do?
Refuse it.
Yeah, you tell them I don't want to do it. Okay, absolutely, you can turn down the SID. All right, and there are other options. But what I would caution you is maybe have that annotated in your 1801. Maybe you already have that worked out what you want to do. And we're going to talk about those other things. We haven't talked about it yet. But I would recommend having that in your 1801 ahead of time and not leave it up to when they issue it to you and then rejecting it, because the chances are you're probably going to get moved to the bottom of the stack for your departure. But if they know what you want ahead of time because they read it in your remarks or you filed for it in your flight plan, I'd say 9 out of 10 times you're going to get what you asked for. All right, that is the role of ATC. The role of ATC is to give the pilot what they ask for until they absolutely can't do it. Okay, is that everyone following along on that one?
Yeah, we just had a story from the net team, their involvement over in Seoul. They requested something, they were given something different, and they had to refamiliarize themselves with the departure plates literally on the fly. So
yeah, thanks for sharing it. I mean, that's a true story. I mean, here's the two stories. There are those who have not had this happen to them, and there's those who have had it happen to them. And it's a matter of time. This will happen to you. I promise you. You're going to get to an airfield and you're going to have one ideal in your head about how we're going to do this departure. Heaven help you if you got a whole flight of people that you discussed this plan to, and you guys are all on the same page, and then you all get issued something completely different. And that happens. That's just life. That's just instruments for you. And but being the savvy instrument pilots that we are as Apache pilots, we're ready for this and we pre-planned. So obviously, as part of your planning is you would look over all of these things. I wouldn't say you'd spend a whole lot of time, memorizing everything about it, but you should have at least perused each one of these standard instrument departures that may pertain to your flight and have some familiarity with it. Is that a fair thing to say?
100%.
Okay, great. I got somebody on board with me on that one. Okay, so that was really just a recap of talking about the SID. So let's go ahead and get out of the SID, okay? Now, do we remember what type of departure procedures from yesterday's discussion that we have available to us? We know SID's one of them, so no need to repeat that one, but there's two more, right?
Diverse departure.
100%. And there's one more.
An obstacle.
And an obstacle departure
departure.
procedure, 100%, spot on, okay? But then it beckons the question, how do you know what an airfield has? We know how to find the SID, because we said yesterday that if there's a standard instrument departure procedure, where would it be?
So I think it says it's safe to assume that you'll have a standard instrument departure available unless listed otherwise, correct?
Not always, not always. If you're saying that every airfield will have this, are you saying that every airfield will have a standard instrument departure unless annotated otherwise?
So saying that your conventional departure for a SID will be utilized if there is none listed, is what I thought it was. But if you're saying that,
no, you're right. That okay. The way you're saying that is correct. I think the way I'm asking the question may be a bit confusing. Yes, what you're saying there is 100%. Okay, if a SID is published, then it is suspected that you would do the SID. Yes, I 100% agree with you on that one. All right, so like, for example, if we were at Songton and there's a Dragon 9 departure, and then you get on the runway and you're like, I'm gonna do the reverse departure procedure. No, you're not. Because when they call you up on the radio, guess what they're gonna give you?
Dragon 9.
Yep, whether you ask for it or not, they're gonna give you the Dragon 9 departure procedure. Does anyone know why they're gonna do that?
I mean, it's published and it's like the safest way, and it doesn't clog up anything.
You're saying it right there in the right way, and really breaking it down to terms everybody can get. That's the thing. If they're issuing it to you, ATC really, the reason it's even there, ATC asked for it. They want that SID. Okay, we want to have this SID so that we can get aircraft out of the terminal area and into the en route structure. So we've developed these set amount of SIDs for these particular runways that will make that happen. And the FAA's looked at it and agreed to it and said, yeah, this will work and it meets the requirements for obstacle clearance and navigation. We're good with this. So here's that SID. So the whole purpose of that SID is just to be able to get you out of the area quickly. And if you have a SID, then you don't have to shoot one aircraft out of the area and then shut it down and wait till it hits the en route or departs the terminal area would be a better way for me to say that, before you can send another aircraft on its merry way. With a SID, you can have multiple aircraft in the pipeline on its way out of the terminal area. And that's to the airport's advantage. Can you imagine a busy airport like Atlanta, right? And they shoot an aircraft and they have to wait till that thing gets into the minimum en route altitude before they can send the next aircraft. I mean, have any of you guys been to Atlanta or a busy airfield like O'Hare or MIA or New York or SeaTac, any one of those places? You guys have been at least SeaTac if you're here in Korea.
Yeah, Atlanta's crazy.
And out of control. I mean, they're landing like 4 runways parallel each other, right?
Right.
And those aircraft are taking off seconds apart from each other. And the reason they can do that is because they have standard instrument departures that are allowing them to do these separation and allows them to do reduced vertical separation between the aircraft. And that's how they're able to do it. All right. So SIDs provides obstacle clearance, but the primary purpose of a SID is to get you out of the terminal area and into your en route structure in the most efficient, expeditious manner available without ATC having to talk too much, because they really don't want to talk to you a lot when they're that busy. Now, Rksg is not very busy. I mean, I say that, but I should qualify that. They're not super busy when it comes to instrument flights, and they love talking to us. So when you give them a call, they don't have a problem giving you a whole, giving you a radar. What they're giving you is diverse vector area departure. They have no problem doing that. They love doing that all day long. But don't get so used to that just because that's how it here at RTSJ. You go to any one of these other busier airfields and they're going to tell you, all right, Dragon, then that's fouled. Have a nice day. Bye. Okay. And then you're just like, whoa, what just happened? All right. So that's probably that's more like that's how that's going to be. More realistic way of looking at that. All right. So let me take a look here and find the instrument handbook. I just had it open. I closed it. Now I don't know where in the world I put it. There we go. Procedures handbook. Let's back this up a little bit. And that's RVR. We're not really talking about that. This is the page we want to be. DPs. Okay, boom. That's the one we're talking about. We already talked about the SID. So the bottom one. Now the question is obstacle departure procedures. All right. Now that's a tricky one. We know where to find a SID. If there's a SID for the airfield, it's going to be in your TPP, Terminal Procedures Publication. All right, on board with me on that one? I think it's still called that. Or did they change it to the chart supplement? Does anyone else? Did they change it to the chart supplement? Why don't we take a look?
We use TPPs in flight school. I don't know if it's
Okay.
a recent change or not. Though.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a look here and see if it's in the chart. If it is still the TTP or is it a chart supplement? I think it is still the TTP. Let's look at Southeast. What do we have in here? It is. It is the TTP. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, when you're inside of ForeFlight, I don't think you have the TPP because it's built into the maps and the airfield. So there's not a separate like one you can flip through like the chart supplement can. Everyone follow me on that one? Is that how it is in the Aero app as well? Or is there actual, do you actually open a TTP and page through it?
You can open it and page through it, but I know you can click on most of them, like wherever like the actual airfield is, and then it'll open up your options.
Okay, so yeah, I don't think that I've not seen it in ForeFlight. Someone else seen it, go ahead and stop me and walk me through it, but I've not seen the actual book inside of ForeFlight. And I think the reason it's not there is because it's integrated into the airfields when you click on them. Is everyone kind of follow along with me, or they've seen something different? Okay, so it sounds like we're kind of, there's some consensus there on that one, that's not there. All right, but I'm going to help kind of talk about some of the nuances of ForeFlight as much as I can. The Aero app, I just don't know. I haven't used it, so I don't have a lot of knowledge on it. All right, so if there's going to be a SID, then we're going to find it under procedures and departure, and that's where it's going to be listed. Now, mine may look a little bit different. Now, it depends if you have, the only difference I have here between yours and probably your subscription is I went ahead and added the battalion, went ahead and gave it to Jefferson, and I added that subscription. So I have both the DoD and Jefferson. But may I caution you, if you're using a DoD chart, and I know it says it doesn't matter, you can use DoD or Jefferson, let your opposite crew member know that you're doing that, because there are some slight differences between the Department of Defense, FAA, and the Jefferson charts. All right. And how do I know that? I know that because of going through V6, and my instructor was using a DoD chart and I was using a Jefferson chart, and we had two different altitudes as far as when it came to step downs. One said one thing, another said something else. And then both of us are wondering, like, why are you saying this when it says this? Or why are you saying this when mine says this? I don't know.
Does one supersede as far as currency goes?
They were both current. They were both current publications. It was just how they had written it. It still met the requirements of the FAA. It's just how it was written changed some of the altitudes in it, but still meets the requirements as far as FAA is concerned.
Shit.
Yeah. So the easy part about that is if you're going to use JEP charts, hey, opposite crew member, you using JEP charts? Nope. All right, then we're using DoD. Okay, and then that will make sure you both are on the same page. I really don't think that matters as far as the applications. And I know that we say on our brigade SOP, we'll tell you that, hey, you can use any application that you want, meaning you can have ForeFlight or you can have Aero app. I'll caution you, 95.1 does not say that. What does 95.1 say?
I'm guessing it says you will use this.
It says you will use the same application. So if I'm using ForeFlight, guess what? My other crew member better have ForeFlight. If you're using Flight Go Pro, I can still use ForeFlight so long as I have Flight Go Pro installed on my iPad and current.
No shit.
Okay. So just know there is a variance in that one. Now, I say this, and here's the thing. If something happens to you and it's just the brigade investigating it, I think you'll be okay. You ball up your aircraft and a big army's coming out and take a look at it, they might have a problem because AR 95.1 does not agree with the brigade SOP. Which one do you think wins?
95.1.
Yeah, damn Skippy. Army regulation's gonna win at the end of the day. So I have told you, that's all I'm gonna say about it, okay? I'll leave it up to you and whatever you think your rank can handle when it comes to that one. Me personally, I make sure that we both are using the same application, that we're in compliance with AR 95-1. That also makes me in compliance with the brigade SOP. True statement, right? I've just been a little bit more conservative by going to what the bigger regulation says. Now, my understanding is that that may change in the future, but that change has not happened yet. Okay, follow along with me so far?
Tracking.
Okay, sweet. Okay, so that brings us right back to determination as far as obstacle departure procedures and do we have them? All right, so let's take a look at, let's go back to our airfield, Rksg. That's our home. Okay, and let's pull up the procedures. Boom, what's missing? What's missing in there?
Departure procedure.
There's no departure procedure. Okay, so does that mean that we don't have anything, or does it mean it's just one particular type that we probably don't have?
Don't have SIDs.
We don't have a SID. That's what that's saying. It says, hey, there's no SID for this airfield. Well, this is where it gets a little wonky because there is IFR takeoff minimums and probably some obstacle departure procedure in ODP, but where the heck are we going to find it?
Under procedures, departures.
You're getting close. You would think it'd be under departure. See, I'm in agreement with you, Mr. Patterson, because if it was me, I would have put it underneath the departure section, but it's under the approach section.
Son of a.
I agree with you. Look at that.
Yep.
I'll click on approach. Okay. Let me, oh, I'm clicking on my screen. I need to click on my iPad. I click on approach. Look at that. Boom. Alpha
IFR.
551 IFR takeoff minimums under the approach section.
Yep.
I don't make the app. I'm just telling you where to find it so you don't get all lost in the sauce. All right. All right. So let's take a look at that thing. I'm going to open it up. All right. And here we are. Okay. Rksg. Do we have an obstacle departure procedure? It might be a trick question here, the way I'm asking it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, there's a yes in there. I got one yes. Okay,
Yeah,
who
no,
else agrees with that?
I would agree.
Okay, we got agreement on that one. Anybody else willing to wager on this bet? Emily, what are your thoughts? She's like, hey, well, hold on a minute. I'm just getting warmed up to this aviation thing here. Don't worry, you got a 50-50 shot of getting it right. Lieutenant Suver, what are your thoughts?
Yes, there is obstacle departure procedure.
Okay, so we
Is that
got
the
three
question?
people.
Yep.
That's the question. So far we got three people almost unanimous thinking that we got an obstacle departure procedure. Turns out we don't. That's a tricky one, isn't it? Because it's right here in the takeoff minimums and the obstacle departure procedure, but this thing is divided in half, but it's really tricky. I don't like the way it's made because it leads you to believe that there is an obstacle departure procedure. But the way this thing is written is there's a section where it says takeoff minimums. There's a section where it would say obstacle departure, but because there isn't an obstacle departure procedure, it's just not included. And then underneath it, it's going to have the takeoff obstacle notes, which are not the same thing as an obstacle departure procedure. You see how tricky that is?
Very much so.
It's tricky. So there's no SID. So we looked in there, there's no SID listed. So there's no standard instrument departure. There's no obstacle departure procedure. How in the world are we getting out of Rksg?
The minimums, right? Your takeoff minimums. So you have to go up by this rate.
So what I want you to do is look at this thing and kind of look at the takeoff minimum and separate that out from the procedure because it's a different animal. It's related, but it's a different animal. Okay. So when thinking that, this is why I don't like how this thing is written, the sections, but I really don't like it because it'll lead you down a rabbit hole real easy. And it's doing it right now. And it's because how it's structured that's doing it. Okay. Yeah. The takeoff minimums, that's a separate thing. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Right now, we're talking about the and part, which is the obstacle departure procedure. And there is no and. Okay. So we know we're not talking about the takeoff minimums and we're at the departure procedure, but there aren't any. Let's see, I don't think I can write on this. Yep.
So there's obstacle and there's departure minimums to avoid said obstacles, but those are not considered obstacle departure procedures.
But there's another thing that's kind of hidden in there, right? There's another type of departure we can do.
Diverse departure?
Diverse.
There we go. It's tricky, isn't it? And we're supposed to know this. How are we supposed to know this? I don't know, but we're supposed to know this, okay? But it's not in our Army regulations. It's going to be in the FAA regulations. So if you look it up in the Instrument Publications Handbook, or you look it up in the AIM, or you look in the CFRs under Part 91, that's where you're going to see this, when it talks about diverse departure procedure. That's the only place you're really going to see it, okay? So what the FAA says that if you're going to do a departure, and there's not a SID, and there's not an obstacle departure procedure, then you may do a diverse departure. Now, to have a diverse departure, now here's how this thing works. We're going to look at this from the perspective of the FAA when they come to the airfield. When you go to an airfield and they decide that they want to have an instrument approach procedure, it's like it's a 2-for-1 here. So the FAA says, well, we got this deal. You pay for the instrument approach, and we're going to automatically take a look and see if you can do a diverse departure procedure. And if you can't, then we're going to help you develop an obstacle departure procedure to make sure your customers don't crash into into all these obstacles around here. All right. And then if you want a little bit extra, and you're like, hey, you know what? We have a tower. We're really busy. We really would like to have a SID. Then they're like, okay, we'll help you develop a SID as well. And now see how that works? It starts off with diverse, obstacle departure, and then SID. Now, SID is ATC, okay? A SID is structured to get you out of terminal air expeditiously to the en route structure. That is the purpose of the SID. The obstacle departure is different. Obstacle departure procedure is there because there's some concern you're going to hit something. All right. Now, when you hear this term diverse, what they're really referring to here is random. This is what they mean. Right? Diverse is a cute word for random. We want you to be able to do a random takeoff. Okay. And when you think of random, what do you think they mean by random?
It's going to be changing. It's going to be like go straight up, turn left, and then another time it'll go up, turn right.
I can get on board with that. Yeah. I can get on board with that. What they're saying, I was seeing if the runway was going to pop up here at Rksg, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. But essentially, what we're talking about here, and I'm going to do a little bit of, let me see, do I want to write on this? I think I do. Okay, here's my pen. What they're saying is diverse, random departure. You can take off, you can go this way, you can take off, you can go that way, you take off, you can do this, you can do that, you can do this over here if you want to, you can come back and climb over, go that way if you wanted to, and you can just do a loop-de-loop if you want to do that, that's fine. You can do all, that's what they're referring to. Okay, but when they're saying random and diverse, they're saying we're giving you the option to do all of these things, but there's some stipulations here. Let me clear some of this stuff out. All right, and is anyone familiar with some of those stipulations might be?
Climb rate?
Climb rate is one of them. 100%. What is the climb rate required to do a diverse departure procedure?
200 foot per nautical mile.
That's right. 200 foot per nautical mile. What's another?
Height of runway, or the end of runway?
That is true. Well, so what altitude did you have to be at the departure end of the runway? I'll help you out here.
35 feet.
Boom, 35 feet. Okay, so you got to be at the 35 feet by the departure end of the runway. You got to be climbing at 200 feet per nautical mile to do this thing. And then at what altitude can you turn?
400 AGL.
400, 100%. You got to be 400 feet AGL above
highest obstacle?
Airport elevation.
Okay, so 700 at Karen's, right? 701.
701 at Kieran, spot on, and then you can make your turn. Okay, I don't think anyone's gonna die if you hit 700 and make your turn. Okay, honestly, I don't, and that's a common thing. And no one's gonna ding you out. But when you're having the conversation, yeah, you'd say 701. Okay, and then you'll turn on altitude. So those are the three things we got to have to do a diverse departure procedure. Now, why would we have one? Now, it turns out the FAA comes out and they do this 41 rule. We're not going to get into it because it's really not that big of a deal for us, right? But they're literally going to come in here, do an assessment. They're going to make like this line, just like you see here. Okay, they're going to create, see that 41 slope right there on my iPad? I'm going to bring out my pen and maybe pick a color that we can actually see. I think black was going to do just fine. Okay, see this area right here? This 40 by 1, you guys see what I'm circling on my iPad?
Yes.
Okay, sweet. Okay, so that's the obstacle clearance, or the OCS, obstacle clearance surface area. Okay, so they're going to chart this from the end of the runway all the way up into the minimum en route altitude. And for a mountainous terrain, guess how high that is?
2,000 feet above?
About 2,000 feet. For non-mountainous, it's
1,000?
roughly about 1,000, okay? Or minimum in-route altitude to get into the route structure, okay? But generally, it's going to get you up to 1,000 or 2,000 feet above the highest obstacle. That's what its purpose is, all right? To get you away from the obstacles, all right? So they've got this whole thing all sketched out, and they're looking to see if there's any obstacles that penetrate this 40 by 1 OCS. If nothing penetrates it, then they'll say that this, you can do a diverse departure procedure. But they do this in all directions once you get above 400 feet, okay? Now, they're saying you have to maintain runway heading, and there's a reason why. Because they only checked so long as you're flying runway heading. So if this way it was, let's see, that's runway 27, so this is the opposite direction, so 090, does that sound right? This runway we'd be taking off of right here? If my math is right, I think that's what that is. We'll be going 090, right? So you have to maintain a heading of 090 until 400 feet, and then you can turn. And what they did is off that runway heading at 090, at a certain amount of angle off that runway on each side, they verify that you're not going to impact any obstacles. But if you turn prior to that, you might. Everyone follow along with me on that? Did I lose anybody? I know that was a lot I kind of threw at you.
Nope, makes sense.
Okay, makes sense. And then you see that yellow line, there's a flight path, and notice that it goes from 200 feet, then it goes up to 400 feet. And what it's doing is it basically did an assessment to make sure you can get off of that runway, or the runway at departure end at 35 feet, and make sure you can clear the obstacle. Now there's a trick here. There are runways that actually have their assessment done at the end of the runway. And then there are some runways that they have an obstacle that penetrates the OCS, or the obstacle clearance surface area. And they realize that if we offset, or we have you climb above the runway above 35 feet, you're clear that obstacle. So rather than creating all these two types of different approaches and have to tell you some of them you climb 35, some you don't, they just say in general, everybody will be 35 feet above the end of the runway takeoff. That takes care of that issue. Because there's no way for you to know if one of these things was assessed at the runway, at the threshold of the runway, or if it was offset back 35 feet. I know that's kind of a tough conversation, but essentially what we're dealing with here is that you have an obstacle that penetrated the OCS, and I'm going to draw this out here to kind of depict this a little bit better. So if this tower was just a little bit higher, right? See where I'm putting a little black piece there? And you'll see that now it's penetrating that blue line. You see that? The OCS, now it cuts right through it. Yeah.
Following.
Okay. And one way we can fix that is if we pushed it back more. So if I took that blue line and I shifted it back across the runway, well, look at this. Now it clears. See what they did? That's cheap, ain't it? All just by pushing that line back a little bit. Now the obstacle doesn't penetrate anymore. So they realized there was a lot of airfields where this was a problem. And instead of creating these excessive prime gradients or these weird, or have to create an obstacle departure procedure, which is expensive for some of these small operators to do, they said, we have this ideal, just push the whole thing back a few feet on the runway and say that you're above the runway threshold at 35 feet, problem solved. And that solved it. It really did. And it made a lot of these airfields able to have these diverse departure procedures instead of having an obstacle departure procedure like Rksg, although we're pretty flat here. So I don't think that would have affected anything for us. Okay, does that make sense now?
Yep, tracking.
Straight. And then who's going to ask this question of you? Nobody. Okay, so that's need to know knowledge. Okay, the part that you do need to know is that you need to be above the runway threshold at 35 feet. And I just gave you the explanation as to why it is you got to be above 35 feet. Okay, is that always? No. But for the most part, that's what we do. We're going to go 35 feet because you don't know which one of these runways, how it was assessed. It's not going to be depicted on the ODP. It's not going to say it anywhere. Okay. So FAA solution to that, 35 feet above the runway threshold, 400 feet above the airfield elevation before you turn on course. And then until you get to your minimum en route altitude, and then you continue as filed or whatever altitude was assigned to you by ATC. And those directions are diverse so that you can turn which direction once you get above 400 feet. Anywhere you want, right?
Makes sense.
100%. You can turn anywhere you want, unless, let's take a look at this.
Depicted.
Well, it won't be depicted. It's going to be in textual form. But if you're saying, hey, textual form is as depicted, okay, I'll accept that. If that's what you're saying, and if it's how it's written, fine. That's sufficient. Okay. Now, what about runway 14 at Rksg? Seems to be a little bit different.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, because it's telling you standard. Okay, and this will get us. Okay, and I'm going to ask the question, and it's going to trip somebody up. What does it mean by standard?
Is it back to the 35 feet?
Nope. I told you it's going to get someone. I hate how this section is written. It drives me nuts because it could have been written a little bit more clearer. Okay, so now when we're talking about standard, we're talking about something different here.
Is that the standard weather is what we're talking about?
There, now we're getting there. Let's talk.
Oh, sorry, my babies.
No, don't worry about that. No, that you're good. Believe me. Okay. When we get to that, when we get to talking about standard, well, now we're referring to takeoff minimums.
So PC under 50 hours, 100 feet, 1/4 mile, statute mile, and then this would be standard for us.
That would be standard for us, 100%, as per what guidance?
95.1, chapter, I think 5.
I think you're right. I'm not sure about the chapter, but I definitely know you get the AR 95.1, spot on. Okay, absolutely. Okay, so now when we get into the standard, then they added something onto that, because then this on runway 14 says it's standard with such and such and such. What's this such and such?
Climb rate.
Climb rate. Well, we said earlier that the climb rate would have been 200 feet per nautical mile. Well, now it's 260. Now here comes the fun part. Does your aircraft report your climb rate in foot per nautical mile?
Negative.
No, it does not. It gets it to you in foot per minute. No, definitely not. It gets you to foot per minute. Now, we're using ForeFlight, but don't worry. I said I would show you where to find this stuff in here because it's in here. I promise you. It's like ragu. I don't know if you guys are old enough. Tyler, you're old enough to know ragu. The pasta sauce, right?
Of course.
Yeah, and they always used to say, that's ragu. It's in there. Okay, this is like ragu. It's in there. I promise you. All right, so let's go in the document section. We'll get out of this here, close it, and I'll show you where to find that. All right, so you back out. Okay, now if you click on FAA, if you've got your ForeFlight with you, I do not know where it's at in the Aero app. Okay, if you click on the FAA tab and then you go to your digital terminal procedure supplement, I think it's going to be on the top and to the left. Okay, you see what I'm talking about? Upper left under the FAA tab. It's got the green check mark on it. I'm gonna open it up. And what do you know? Right at the end, there it is. Okay, there's your instrument takeoff or approach procedures chart rate and descent table. This is my favorite question to ask during an instrument departure procedure. When we're, excuse me, let me rephrase that. This is my favorite question to ask during an instrument check ride. I love it when people go to their digital flight bags. I love it because I think that that's a very forward way of doing things. I love to see people using their digital flight pads, doing programming, inputting the information, and knowing how to use it. But it also upsets me when you don't know how to use it, because then it's like, well, why are you using it if you don't know where your information is? You're going to get yourself into trouble with that thing because you only know a few things, but not all of it. You need to know all of it, all right? Because you're relying on this thing to give you the information that you need for flight planning. Because I guarantee you're not carrying around your paper publications anymore, right? You're using all your digital publications. So it's important that you have a good, a good method of how to use that stuff. All right, so now we know where it is and we know where to find it. Now, when I ask you that question on your instrument check ride, you know exactly where to go. You're like, oh, I know where it is. FAA, there it is. Digital Subject Procedures Checklist. Check the block. Thank you for your A. See you next year. Too easy, right?
I mean, with ForeFlight, absolutely.
100%. Okay. Now, if you have the other Aero app, spend some time in there to find out where it's located and figure out where that's stored at, because it's in there. I promise you, it's probably in there somewhere. And if you don't know where it is, well, doggone it, make sure you carry your paper book with you so that you can show the person that you have the publication and be like, I have it. I can actually do this. I actually did this as part of my flight planning. And then they can say, okay, sweet. I know you looked at this at least. I can comfortably say you know what you're doing. Okay. Now, how do I use this thing? We had 260 foot per nautical mile. Okay, we got a little column over
You
here.
look at the-
Match airspeed in your foot per nautical mile.
That's right.
Yeah.
What airspeed do you think we're going to be taking off at?
90 knots.
I don't know about the 90s. That's a tough one. Now, could you do it? Yes. But remember, you still have to do your air. You have to check your pitot tubes. So we're really going to be what, at 70 knots?
Yeah, that 60, 70 sounds prime.
Yeah, that's about where you're going to be, because we have to do this whole cross check thing now. So you're going to be really probably hitting 70 knots, and that's the airspeed you're really going to be climbing up at. And you typically for an ITO takeoff, you should be climbing at your max rate climb airspeed, which puts you right around 73, 75 knots. Fair statement to make, I would say.
Makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. So all right, so you're there with me on this one. All right, so that's right. Go ahead.
For Aero app users, you go to general, and then you go to legend. So you'll find the chart, and then also the E6B calculator on it. You can calculate it out what your rate of climb will be.
Oh, outstanding. So they got that one in there. I used to know I had the equation for this memorized when I was in instrument school, and I don't remember it. So maybe next time I'll actually come up with it. It's a really simple equation. You can just write it in there and use it, and then you can get it for every airspeed. You can determine what that foot per minute would be. Or E6B, it'll definitely give it away for you. E6B is a really easy way to put that in, and that appears to be built into the Aero app. All right, so 260, and guess what it's going to be at 60? Now I'll give you a freebie. If you're at 60 knots, guess what it's always going to be? It's always going to be whatever the foot per nautical mile is. Check me on that one. Yeah, right there. 260, 260, 250, 250. They're going to be an exact match. So if you're going 60 knots, the answer is 260. Okay. But we're going to be going somewhere a little bit above that. So you know it's going to be somewhere between 260 and 390. Now, do I get too wrapped around the axle about this? No, because guess what rate of climb you're probably going to be at if you're doing a legit ITO takeoff at 15 to 20% above your hover power torque.
$500 feet per minute climb.
Oh, it's going to be above that. That's probably for like, if you think of like task 1048 VMC takeoff, 10% above IGE, that's, and then usually once you get above 45 knots, you're usually going about what airspeed? If you're doing just a regular VMC takeoff, 10% above IGE, above 45 knots, and you didn't do anything with the collective.
That's some IP level info right there.
Oh, you do this every day, you just don't realize it. Well, maybe not every day. Maybe every other week when you fly, you do this.
Recently?
Yeah. Okay. Every other month.
Got it.
For Captain
Okay.
Reynolds, once a quarter.
All right. So what's the speed when we're not touching the collective at just like a positive rate of climb? You're saying 10% or 15 to 20?
If you're 10, it's 10%. So 10% above IGE, you got 10% above IGE applied, and you're above 45 knots. So you're well above ETO.
Okay. So I mean, like you're once again that max rate of climb, probably like what, 70?
You're gonna be pretty close to almost
90-ish?
I'd say between 800 to 1,000 feet per minute rate of climb. Guaranteed, you're going to be right in that ballpark. And as you get closer, you get to 76 knots, the higher that rate of climb. I don't know if you noticed this, but most of the time when you guys are doing your VMC takeoffs and usually when you're training with us for aero progressions, you end up reducing the collective to maintain a 500 foot per minute rate of climb. Now we're talking Apache-isms, okay, or helicopter-isms, because all helicopters are pretty much going to do the same thing. So as soon as you take off, you got 10% above IGE, and you can check me on this next time, maybe next quarter when you guys jump in a helicopter and go for a flight. When you take off and do your VMC takeoff, just watch it. Put in your takeoff power, 10%. You got to make sure you put in your 10% above IGE. Take off. Watch what happens when you get above 45 knots. Watch your foot per minute rate of climb. It's going to be well above 500 feet per minute. You're going to be sitting right around 800, almost to 1,000. And the closer you get to your max rate climb airspeed, which is roughly about 73 knots, you're going to be above 1,000 feet or 1,000 feet per minute, and you're going to have to reduce the collective because we say for training, you should be doing a 500 foot per minute rate of climb, right? At least that's what us IPs tell you. And then when you're actually doing mission flights, we don't care. They're with me on that, or is it the first time you? Hopefully it's not the first time you're hearing this.
No, I trust you. Sounds correct.
Okay. All right, sweet. Okay. All right. So for an ITO takeoff, you are going to be climbing well above 500 feet per minute. Okay. Maybe I haven't made a believer out of you yet until you actually get in the aircraft and do this. Or you can actually see this in the LCT too. It'll do the same thing. But you're going to be, I promise you that your climb rate below 500 feet per minute will rarely ever be a problem for you. Unless what happens? There is something that can dramatically affect that.
A single engine failure?
Oh, yes. If you take off and you have an engine failure, you are not going to be able to maintain 1,000 foot per minute rate of climb. In fact, if you have, I hope you have 1,000 foot per minute rate of climb, because then if you have an engine failure, what's going to happen to your rate of climb?
It's going to drop.
It's going to drop substantially. And maybe you can get away with 500 feet per minute if you're at your max rate climb airspeed 73 knots. You can probably still get away with that. Okay, but you're going to have a problem climbing up. Is that fair to say?
You know, I'm gonna have
Probably
to agree
not
with
the new Echoes that we're all going to be flying now, though, right?
Yeah, the new Echoes have a lot of power, but I would agree with you. They have quite a bit of power margin. I'm not sure yet. I haven't looked at the performance on them, but I do think that if you have an engine failure, you probably might have an issue. You're going to lose some climb performance. I just don't know by how much you're going to lose it because I haven't messed around with the performance charts. And here's the other issue. How many times have you sat down when going instrument and actually sat down and did your planning based on a single engine failure?
Well, I mean, according to our crew brief, every time, right?
No, we never do it. I've never done it. I'm an IP and an IE rated guy, and I've rarely ever sat down and like, I wonder what my rate of climb is going to be if my engine fails.
Oh, you're saying rate of climb. I thought you meant discuss single engine failure before going out for a
okay, that's fair. Yeah, discuss. Yeah, you're right about that. Yeah, we always have a discussion about the single engine failure, but we probably should maybe modify that and be a little bit more purposeful about it, because that's exactly what's going to happen when we talk about a single engine failure. We're automatically going to go to those FRC cars and do what it says. But you got a problem. It's hard to fly when you can't see.
That's true.
Okay,
Crazy.
so I'm glad you're there with me on this one. Okay, so that's gonna freak you out a little bit to have an engine failure in the cloud. So I would say that now we really need to look at this a little bit more carefully. I'm not saying that you need to do this, but maybe approach this a little bit carefully. Mr. Smith going forward is actually going to start looking at what my performance is going to be if I have an engine failure, because that's a possibility. That's when I'm going to be putting the most demand on this aircraft. Is during takeoff. And CMF, of course. When you ain't doing CNF and instruments. At least you shouldn't be.
There was just somebody in Savannah that threw up in his shirt for his first CMF flight in the front seat. He said he didn't get it anywhere in the cockpit. So for those lieutenants that are about to get CMF certified once we're in those Echoes.
Yeah,
tuck 'em
buddy,
in.
it can, if you're riding with me, I'll warm you up slowly. You know, I'm one of those kind of warm you up slowly kind of guys, and then get you in the flight controls and let you make yourself throw up. But generally, when you're in the flight controls, you won't throw up. It's usually when the other person's doing this to you, that's when you don't feel so good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Derek knows.
Yeah, that's just a side note there. Okay, so back on talking about this here, and then having a single engine failure. All right, now the 135 operators and the big airline operators that have multi-engine aircraft, they have to, by law, flight plan for a single engine failure. We don't, but we should. It's prudent. I would say, as a prudent aviator, you should consider the possibility of an engine failure and what your climb rate's going to be, and can you maintain a proper climb rate to get to the minimum in right altitude? Because if you have an engine failure, what is your, okay, let's think about what FRC says. What's the urgency to land in accordance with the FRC for a single engine failure? Emily, we don't expect you to know this one if you're still on here with us.
As soon as practical.
As soon as practicable, right? Winds land as soon as practicable when you're in IFR conditions, or when you're flying IMC conditions.
When you're out of IFC or IMC conditions, right?
Yeah, probably
That
when
would
you
be
reach your destination.
Yeah.
Because
for a
heaven
safe
help
zone.
you, heaven help you took off, right? You took off, and yeah, I'm an Army aviator. My takeoff minimums are 1/4 mile and 100-foot ceilings. Are you landing back at Rksg with a 1/4 mile and a 100-foot ceiling?
Not with a 100-foot ceiling, no.
Negative. Yeah, so you're not coming back here, but you just
Nope.
took off and you had an engine failure. So, and let me get, I know what, I'll go to the nearest airfield. I don't think so. They probably have the same weather conditions we have because they're nearby.
Oops.
See how this just got worse because of an engine failure?
I do.
Okay, so I would say now the commercial guys, they have to consider this. They have to consider the possibility of an engine failure and where they're going to go. So they actually do look at that. They do look at, where can I go land my aircraft if I have an engine failure that has an instrument approach procedure that I can meet the weather minimums for. I would say, as prudent pilots, we should look at that too. So when you decide you're going to take off at Rksg, I don't think you have to do it all the time, because if you're doing one of these VFR and the IMC transitions, don't worry about it. Okay, because they'll get you a PAR and they're going to get you down. If you're above the, if the weather minimums here are meet the weather planning minimums to do an approach here, you're good. If you wanted to come in here and the weather planning minimums don't meet that requires you to have an alternate, then you probably should have an alternate for your takeoff as well, because you're probably not going to be able to come back and land at this airfield. Does that make sense as a way to set a line as to when you should probably consider an alternate for takeoff in case you have an emergency?
That does, but would you be flying out into, like, I mean, for training purposes and planning purposes, would I be flying to, I don't know, Osan for training if my weather minimums to come back to Rksg like weren't being met?
It depends on the mission. Because if the mission, that, yes, it is a possibility, but it is a consideration too. And the way you can mitigate that consideration is, I have an alternate that I can go to if I cannot get to my destination. Now, remember, the whole point of you taking off from this airfield is that you're not coming back here. So I would say, don't let that bother you too much if it's below your planning minimums, because the point is not take off and come back. The point is take off and go to your destination. If you have an emergency, well, that's different. That's an emergency. We don't plan on emergencies. Emergencies just happen. Then have in your back pocket as when you're sitting down with that briefer and they're like, hey, I noticed you're taking off, but the planning minimums, the weather here is less than what the other planning minimums are for you to even come in here and do an approach without an alternate. And that's where Smart Pilot would have been like, yes, I'm aware of that. And I have chosen an alternate airfield that, in case I have some kind of emergency, that I'm going to fly to, and that's where I'm going to terminate, i.e. a single engine failure. Now, see how you're mitigating that?
I do. That makes sense.
Okay, everybody else follow along with that too? And that makes sense to all of you, or does anyone see that differently?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm glad we're talking about these things. That's why I said I love it when it goes down the aviation abyss, because these are conversations that we've never had to have before, because we came off of a Delta aircraft, or we came from Flight School 21 or Fort Rucker, where those things were just taken care of for us and we didn't have to worry about it. But now we really need to start thinking about that, because we have, we have Captain Reynolds, who'll be coming up as, ideally at AMC pretty soon. Same for you, Lieutenant Stuver. I mean, that's kind of the goal for you, Tyler Patterson, to come up as a PC. And so we have all these aviators here that we got to turn around and turn into PCs in a very, very short order, that because of just the nature of the beast here in Korea. And these are now things we now have to think about as aviators, that we've not been exposed to. Okay. All right, gentlemen, it's 5 minutes to 7. I promise to keep these things down to an hour. So I'm going to open the floor up and see. I know it's a little bit 5 minutes early, but I don't want to open up any more discussions, because I can't finish anything I would start within 5 minutes. So I'll go ahead and say, does anyone have any questions before I close this up?
Yeah, I got a quick question.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you pull up where it does have an obstacle departure procedure on it?
Oh, you want to see an alternate departure procedure?
No, ODP.
No, obstacle departure.
ODP, you want to see what one looked like?
Yeah.
Yes.
What
Let
is-
me see if, let's go to Fort Rucker. Geez, KOZR, they might have one. There's departures, takeoff minimums. Okay, we might have to go through a little bit to find one. There's one. If you look on the second page, Alabaster, Alabama, you kind of look in the same place where I'm at. There's takeoff minimums. And then if we go down, there's a departure procedure. There's one. There's an actual departure procedure for runway 34. Okay, and it actually giving you some options here, because you have a runway 34 where you can do a diverse, but it changed your weather minimum, so you have to have 301 with the minimum. And here's what gets fun, because we said, what's our standard takeoff minimums?
$100 feet ceiling, quarter section up.
100%. Well, this says 301. Does that apply to you?
We're taking off
I thought-
there, yeah.
It does not.
Yep, it doesn't, but
Yeah. Now, you probably not, I would say that you probably really, because you consider those takeoff minimums if you're going to take off, because there's a reason why it's there. I won't be taking off below that, because there's a reason why it was written there. If it's good enough for the civilian operators, then it's probably good for me too. But no, you're not legally bound to apply it. In fact, as a Part 191 flight guy, so like Lieutenant Stuver, you're a Part 91 person, right? You've got your fixed wing ratings. Does anyone else have fixed wing ratings? Yeah. Okay. Guess what your takeoff minimums are? You don't have any.
No. Yeah.
There are no takeoff minimums. Okay. But we say when that Part 91 world, you should comply with that. Does that answer that question where someone wanted to see that departure procedure and what that looked like? Textually? Okay. Were there any other questions before we buck out?
I'm just looking at 95.1 now. Maybe I have a, hold on. It says all aviators / operators will comply with published non-standard IFR takeoff minimums, departure procedures, and obstacle departure procedures and flips. So,
okay,
how's
yeah,
that?
if it does say that, then that is, I apologize. Yep, if that's blurb is in 95.1, which it sounds like it is because you're reading it right now, that is the absolute gospel.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's why I was confused there. That's
Yep. I
5-3.
apologize for that.
You want to look over it? Yeah, it's March 2018 though. I don't know what the most recent was.
No, that is the most recent. What I may be referencing is let me check real quick where I may have gotten that from, and that may not. But 95.1 rules today, regardless of what I'm gonna point out. Here we go. So IFR departure procedure and takeoff minimums are included below and established to assist pilots to refer to appropriate service directives for takeoff minimums. And that's what I was referring to. As well. But then again, you read 95.1, our takeoff minimum sends you right back here. Okay, this one says this because this is a DoD flip. If I was looking at a non-DoD flip, it would say it does not apply to military users. So I don't know if anyone has a non-DoD version of this. I don't have one right now. I only have the DoD. Or let me check if I have or not. I haven't even really make sure. Let me take a peek here to see if I can find a non-DoD version of that.
Okay, so then you interpret that as the DoD flip telling you we don't need to. So the DoD flip says we don't need to use those minimums, so we don't have to. So we're still in accordance with 95.1.
Okay, so what it's doing is it's going in a circle. So the DoD flip says for military users, refer to your regulations. Army regulation says you will comply with whatever the flip says. The flip says it's 301, so it's 301. Now, where that may come into play is maybe Navy says you don't have to apply by that and use ours. It may be different for the Navy, may be different for the Air Force, but based on what you just read from AR 95-1, we have to do it because it says that refer to the DoD flip minimums.
Makes sense to be safe anyway.
Okay,
So
I may have created some confusion with my initial response. I apologize for that. Is everybody still following along? That what it's saying is that you will comply with that, but it's going in a circle. What it's doing, it's what the DoD flip saying refer to your regulations. Our regulations for Army says you will comply with it.
Well, I'm just 100% more confused now. We've been saying that for a hot minute. You're an Army pilot with over 50 hours IMC. You can just do whatever you want.
Okay, that's still true. Okay, and it's true when the departure procedure says standard. That's true. When it doesn't say standard and it has a minimum listed in there, for us, we have to comply with it.
Okay.
Okay, and it's good that Captain Reynolds went and found the 95.1 because I can tell you right now, if you go and look it up in the AIM or you look in the CFR, it's going to tell you it doesn't apply to military users. But you look in DoD flip and it says refer to your regulation, and our regulation says you're going to comply with it.
Oh my.
Okay, so to summarize that, if it says standard for us, if you have less than 50 hours, quarter mile, 100-foot ceiling. If you have greater than 50 hours of weather time logged as PC, then it's 00. If it says anything other than standard, you have to comply with what those numbers are, and it's going to be a ceiling and a visibility.
Love it.
Okay, sweet. Captain Mills, thank you very much for bringing that up.
So smart. Must have went to like MIT or something.
All right, gentlemen, it's been another great day to discussion aviation, and we'll do this again tomorrow, same time, and we'll continue with this conversation and wrap up the obstacle departure procedure, and then we'll talk about the diverse vector area and diverse departure procedure, and then I think it's worth talking about lost comms because that's a possibility too. You're taking off, you lose comms, now what are you supposed to do? Right, and that's not the ideal time for it to happen. That's probably what it's going to happen, though. All right, everyone's good with that for tomorrow?
Sounds good.
All right, outstanding. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I actually recorded this time, so I'm proud of myself.
Love it.
Now, how do I make it stop recording?